So, you well may know that we are in a series which is about transforming self and transforming world. And we're quite well into the series now. We had quite a lot of talks on different aspects. And hopefully something that's becoming clearer and clearer through all the talks is how basically you can't do one without the other. If we transform ourselves for the better or for the worse, we'll transform the world. If the world transforms and either for the better or the worse, it will have an effect on us and we will be transformed by it. So transforming self and world, they both work together. But today I'm looking at a particular kind of mythical way to approach, I suppose, mostly transforming self, although of course it does have an effect on the world. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at what's called the hero's quest. And there's a little subtitle to my talk, which is Bliss, Bestowing Hands, which if you keep listening, at some point I'll tell you why and what that means. Okay. But I'm going to start with 3 stories. Okay, so the first story is, so once upon a time, there was a young man and he'd lived his life kind of in obscurity, living in the country. And he thought of himself as just an ordinary young man. And then for various reasons, he came across a churchyard. And in the churchyard, there was a sword stuck in a stone. And there was a big sign saying, if someone can pull this sword out of the stone, they'll be able to be King of England. And this young man, whose name happened to be Arthur, he thought, well, I'll just give that a bit of a go. You never know what might happen. And he went to pull the sword, and it just came out really lovely and smooth, like a knife out of butter. And because of that, he became king. He became King of England. And he was helped by the wizard Merlin and various other people, but particularly by the wizard Merlin, to learn various skills. And he became a great king, a great hero. He fought many battles against the Saxons, who were in England at that time. And in the end, he fought off the Saxons and he set up court at Camelot. So he married Guinevere and he started the Order of the Knights of the Round Table. And all those knights had lots of adventures as well, searching for the Holy Grail. So they would go into dark forests, have big adventures, meet loads of monsters, evil wizards, rescue some damsels, etc. And all in searching for this Holy Grail. So I haven't got time really to go into all that story. You could spend, I think, weeks exploring all those different stories. But basically for Arthur, it was, after some time he got old and he died. But in his lifetime, he transformed from this young man to a very wise king. And he left a transformed country behind him. So the myth goes, the story goes, which had a chivalric code of kindness, fairness. Okay, so that's how some versions of that story goes. This young boy transformed through his life into a wise king, leaving a country behind. And it's interesting that that story is still very popular today, isn't it? It's like a story that we relate to in different ways. Okay, so there's one story. So a second story. Okay, so in this story, there's a young woman, and she's living in poverty with her mother and her sister. And her sister gets picked at random to take place in a brutal televised set of games. Okay, where the people that take part in the games have to fight each other to the death for the entertainment, really, of the rich and of the masses. And this young woman, Katniss, she steps forward to take her sister's place, so that her sister doesn't have to take part in this game, this Hunger Game, as it's called. And so what Katniss does is she has to leave her home, her sister and her mother, and she has to look for a way to survive, basically for herself, but also for her family to survive. And what she finds herself doing is training for these games, learning many skills, and helped by a mentor, a bit of a kind of eccentric mentor, but he's still a mentor, and he helps her. And during those games, she faces many trials, difficulties, fights many battles, and finally takes a great risk, which actually allows her and someone else to win the games. And eventually, after various books and films, she becomes the symbol of a freedom movement, which is fighting to overcome the inequality of her world. So through her heroic actions, she creates a better world too. Okay, so my third story. There was once a prince, and he lived in great luxury. He was very handsome, very capable, very confident, had everything that a prince could wish for. However, he went outside his palace and he saw old age, sickness and death. And he became aware of suffering, dissatisfied with his life. So seeing a wandering holy man, he thought there must be a way out of this suffering. And he left his home to go and look for answers. So after much suffering, many trials, tribulations, he ended up sitting down under a great big fig tree. And as the morning star rose, early in the morning, he attained to enlightenment. He woke up, saw reality, and he became the Buddha, the awakened one. And what he did was he gradually built a Sangha. He taught the path to awakening. And when he died, he'd set the foundation, really, for a religion which has changed the lives of many millions of people over 2,500 years. Okay, so those three stories of different heroes. And so it's interesting that you probably remember, if you've done the intermediate course, that we look at the role that myths play in our lives. That it's a bit like there's a deeper part of ourselves that doesn't get reached by the rational, that we need myths and stories to reach it. And there's a writer called Joseph Campbell who's really explored the role of myth. He's looked at myths, legends, stories from all sorts of different cultures over many different, going right back through the history of humanity. And he found that the story of the hero's quest, that story of the hero going forth, seems to be very universal in human history. And he called it the monomyth. I think he felt that it was the myth underneath most stories. But I'm not sure how true that is, because actually when I looked up his structure of this myth, it's incredibly complicated, and it just kind of all starts to get a bit... But anyway, I think there's something in it that idea of the hero journeying through life is something that appeals to us all. If it wasn't, we wouldn't have the popularity of so many stories and films that are basically full of heroes achieving things, from Batman, Wonder Woman, Incredible Hulk, all that kind of stuff. The stories like J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter stories, Lord of the Rings, etc. There's all these stories that are really, really popular to us. Okay. So what Campbell says, he feels that these kind of great issues of our human existence, these kind of quandaries we find ourselves on as humans, are best explored in myths. That's why we love them so much. And he says that in the symbolism of the hero cycle, what we do is we undertake life's most universal journey through the darkness of our own ignorance and fear of the unknown to a realm of self-understanding and peace. So we have to travel through darkness, and then through that we change, and we move into understanding and peace. And he feels that mythology, rite and ritual allows that to be played out for us in a way that we can relate to it. And in films and books, we see those stories played out in front of us. It's a bit like characters in those films and those books, those stories. They're all aspects of our psyche, and they play out the story that we can see. So heroes are agents of change on a quest. And sometimes the hero is the ultimate altruist who's sacrificing his or her life for the greater good. Okay, so let's just have a look at some aspects of the hero's story, the hero's quest that Joseph Campbell identified. Should be here. Okay, so I don't know if you can read that at the back, but it basically says stages of the hero's quest. So there's what's called the call to adventure, separation, initiation, and return. Okay, so the call to adventure. So normally, the hero is leading a pretty ordinary life, well, of whatever their life is, So it might be in a village, it might be in a palace, but they're just going about their normal life. And something happens, and that's the call to adventure. And it could be that it's like they need to go and get something for some reason. It could be they need to go and rescue somebody. It might be that they need to save their own lives. All sorts of things can happen, but they end up setting off on some kind of a quest. And heroes can choose to ignore this call to adventure if they want. Often that means they just kind of end up feeling very squashed, restrained by their lives. And often it comes back, the call will come back. Even if they turn it down the first time, it will come back to them. So the hero ends up having to set off on a journey. And that's what's called the separation part of the hero's quest. So they leave the village, they leave the palace, And often they start to get some help. So they might meet a wise wizard, or they might meet an old lady who doesn't look, she just looks like a kind of normal old lady, but really she's very wise. They might meet some animals, some talking animals, and they'll get given, and they might do some kind things actually. Quite often heroes will do something kind, maybe rescue a bird that's been trapped, or a fish that's out of water, put it back in the water, something like that. And then because of that, the fish or the bird or the animal will talk to them and tell them some things that will help them later. And they might give them something magical as well to help them on their way, perhaps some magical power or some magical object that they'll take with them. What often happens as well is that the hero will actually form part of a fellowship. So in Lord of the Rings, for instance, the first book is Fellowship of the Ring. It's like there's a fellowship of people who want the same thing, who set off together. And so the hero sometimes is on their own, sometimes not. And they often make new friends, meet new people, and companions for their quest. Okay, so they set off on their separation, they leave all that they know, off they go, and then they go into initiation, and this can take a really long time. And this is where they have all those trials and those arduous times. So heroes usually have to fight lots of difficult, very dangerous battles. They have to go to really dark, scary forests, climb really high mountains, cross storm-filled oceans. They get stuck in terrible bogs, in mists and fog. Meet lots of hungry monsters and dragons, who want to eat them. Huge spiders sometimes. Evil wizards, enchanters, all those kind of people who want to entrap them in some way, kill them, stop them from achieving their quest. And often the hero will use his or her magic powers to overcome all these obstacles. And then another obstacle will appear and they'll go off and all sorts of things happen. You know the stories, I'm sure. But in the end, they win the quest. So they get whatever it is they wanted to do. They fight, they see the Holy Grail, they overcome the bad wizard, and they win the quest. So the third part, after initiation, which obviously changes them a great deal, is they return. They return, they go back to their village, they go back to their palace, but they've changed. And there's that T.S. Eliot phrase, or quote, that I think really books well this thing, which is, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time. So the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And I think that's often true of the hero. He or she arrives back where they came from and they see it in a very different way. So not all these stages happen in all myths and all stories, but there can be an interesting framework for us to just look at our lives, and particularly our spiritual journey. So for us, it's an inner process. Most of us probably aren't fighting many dragons. We might be, I don't know. But for most of us, it's an inner process. So we can think, what is in our inner process the call to adventure? What is it that sets us off on our journey? So it could be that our lives just aren't working for us and it's really clear we're having a lot of suffering and we want to change. Or it might even be that our lives are actually very comfortable. They're almost too comfortable and we feel there's something more that we need. You probably remember from the intermediate course that we spend quite a lot of time looking at the vision. What is it that made us want to come to the Buddhist Centre for the first time? What's made us want to explore different ways of being? That's the call to adventure. And you may have had experience of ignoring your call to adventure and it coming back and getting you later. Okay, I love, in the call to the adventure, there's an image that I really love actually, which is I think from Hinduism, which is the call of Krishna's flute. So the idea is that there's a village and at night, all the women are asleep, beside their husbands. They're all the women who look after the cows in the village. And they hear Krishna's flute from the forest. And it's so beautiful that they get up and they leave their sleeping husbands and they go and dance all night in the forest. And there's something about that really sums up that call to adventure, that call to the wild in the forest. Okay, so if we do follow the flute, if we do change, then we'll enter the separation process, the phrase. And I suppose, all the time it'd be good for you to be thinking about, does this connect with your own experience? So we might not physically change what we do, though we might. We might physically have to move, or leave something we've been, change something. We might not actually physically do that, but we might actually separate from something in some way, even if we stay in the same situation. We might find ourselves having to learn how to relate to something quite differently. It might be some aspect of ourselves, the way we do something, the way we see the world. It might be an activity we do, it might be a relationship. There's a way that we need to separate ourselves from how we've been. And then we go into the initiation phase. And this is where we might expect to meet the wise old wizard, the wise old woman, who doesn't, the one who can give us the help, the talking animals, and the magic objects and the magic powers. Okay, so this would be great, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be great if you just went out somewhere and someone went, okay, great, you've become a mitra, here's your magic powers. Okay, but actually I think we have been given many magical powers actually. And for those of us who've decided to engage with this particular spiritual path of Buddhism, it's quite a lot of gifts we've been given. And I think 3 really important ones actually are the practice of awareness, the practice of metta, and the practice of ethics. Because they are magical gifts that can change our lives and change the lives of other people. So awareness is magical, as we know, because when we're aware, we can change. We can have a little bit more control over how we respond to what's going on in our lives. We become just a little bit less going round and round in that cycle, just triggered by things. With awareness, we can actually think, well, I want to behave in a different way. And if we don't have awareness, we can't do that. And that ability to be aware is something pretty magical. Okay, metta is magical because I think it's just such a radical approach. It saves us, it rescues us from being caught up in our likes and dislikes all the time and that kind of suffering. Because actually we want all beings to be happy, whether we like them or not, whether they're beautiful or not, whether they please us or not, whether they do what we want or not. We're just really changing around the way that we see the world, and we're creating a different world. And ethics, I think, are quite a magical gift that we have as well, because they're a way that we can live in the world having a yardstick that we're measuring what we're doing against, in a way that we know that we'll become happier and other people will become happier. So if we see awareness, metta, ethics as our magical powers, we can see that we can train in them. So like that scene in every martial arts movie where the person who's kind of training, the apprentice is learning all their skills and becoming really amazing at martial arts. And normally it happens quite fast. They speed it up and you just see all these different shots of kind of one day they can do this and that and all that kind of stuff. And at the end, of course, they just manage to push their master over, and then the master goes, yes, you can go out into the world. But, if we think of ourselves as being like that novice, and what we're doing is we're training every day in our magical powers, that means that when we sit down and we meditate, we're going into the dojo, okay? When we sit in front of the shrine and we bow, we're bowing to our master, who will help us develop our magical powers. And we train ourselves slowly, day by day. Sadly, we can't speed it up. We have to do that work day after day, month after month, year after year. But what we're doing, I think, to me, it changes it round. It's like I'm training myself in my magical powers. It makes it a kind of much more exciting thing to do. And where do we practice them? Well, we just practice them in our everyday life. I was writing this today, and I was sitting in my terraced house on a road with quite a lot of litter, and I went to the local supermarket. It was grey skies, and I was thinking, my life is not very heroic. And actually, I thought, no, this is where it happens. This is where the heroic happens. It happens in your terraced house, when you go to the local supermarket, the people that you meet, how you are, that is where our training happens in magic. Okay? So, I've got here what the hero needs. So what we need to do is have our magic powers, so we've got them. We need to have a quest that's bigger than us, or bigger than them. The hero needs a quest that's bigger than us. So, going to find the Holy Grail, whatever that was, this magical thing, that was bigger than the knights. They were prepared to sacrifice their lives for that. For the Buddha, in the end, he said, I'm going to sit down under this tree and I don't care what's going to happen to me. I'm going to attain enlightenment. He was prepared, well, he sacrificed a lot, didn't he? He sacrificed living in a beautiful palace with everything he could have. He was looking at something that was bigger than him. He wanted something that would change the life of his wife and his child and all the people he knew, that would help them to understand, relate to suffering in a different way. So we need to have a quest that's bigger than us. We need to have our magic powers. We need a fellowship. And I think the great thing is that we have our Sangha. So we have our fellowship. We have our brothers and sisters, our band of brothers and sisters, who we can think of as being heroic companions on our quest. And we need advice from the wise. So we've got the Buddha, give us advice. We've got Sangha to give us advice. We've got whoever else you find helpful, give you advice, but we have that as well. So basically, we've got everything that a hero needs for our quest. Okay, and what might we find? So I talked about, the hero sets out, they have to fight loads of battles, and it's all very difficult, and there's kind of, in the forests and going over the oceans. And what's our equivalent of that in our lives? Well, it was interesting, because as I said, I wasn't feeling particularly heroic today. It was great to think about, actually, that's when we really need the idea of the hero, actually, or they kind of get in touch with it. Because at the moment, I seem to be having to face quite a lot of sort of just anxiety, unpleasant feelings. I'm not really enjoying my life very much. It's quite a struggle. And so there's something about, if I can call on something bigger than me, that can really help me face that. So I think it's almost like when things feel really mundane is when we perhaps need the heroic more than ever. And so for us, it might just be very, very heroic. It is very heroic to sit with the discomfort of anxiety. To face your fears, to be able to meditate, or just to sit quietly and just be with how you're feeling at that time. And, do all we can. The kind of practice we're really used to hearing about, which is, working with our craving, working with our anger and our hatred. Being able to handle the imperfection of ourselves, the imperfection of others. So turning towards our experience, staying in the gap. Framing our lives as being part of something bigger than ourselves. So I think that's why I find the idea of the hero, even when I'm not feeling particularly heroic, why I think it can be beneficial in our practice. Because it can help us to frame our lives as something much bigger, and it can give us energy. Because sometimes, as I said, we don't feel like heroes. We might even feel that actually this archetype of the hero has some issues, which I think it does. I think there's definitely like a shadow side of the hero archetype, which is a kind of individualism, a selfishness, the idea that we do it, I will it, okay? And as I've said, it seems to be like a pretty universal human myth. And I think it's really been abused by a lot of people. There's been a lot, hasn't there, about the First World War in the news recently. And, all those young men who went out as heroes and basically who were kind of, used by the generals and the politicians, their heroic ability, their willingness to be heroes was used by others for completely meaningless, reasons. So it's really important that we're careful about what we choose as our quest. Okay? It's really important that we're careful about that, because we can have that part of ourselves can be used in unhelpful ways. I think another thing, which actually Nick just reminded me of, which was very helpful, which was about sometimes we can think, well, the hero will save us. We don't need to do anything. We just need to wait for that hero, and he will come and save us and sweep us off our feet or whatever, and everything will be fine. And that often happens in films, doesn't it? There's like the hero character who saves everybody else. Well, actually, we can't be saved by anybody else. We can't even be saved by the Buddha. We have to do it ourselves. We have to become the heroes of our own lives. And, So I think as well as this idea, I think there's also a kind of thing you get in films quite often, particularly cowboy films, I think, where there's this kind of lone hero who kind of rides off and saves loads of people. Well, not saves loads of people, actually kills loads of people. and it's like, and he's seen as a hero. And actually, I think that's not really a true hero, actually. It's interesting that I read one of those Terry Pratchett novels, and it had this whole thing in it about, like in those kind of films, where there's loads of people who are the guard, and then there's a second guard, and then there's all the poor old policemen in uniforms, and they're basically just there to get killed. They're just not real people in the story. It's like, you see them coming in the film, okay, that person's going to get killed, and that person's going to get killed. And it's always kind of giving us a picture as if the only important person in the world is the hero. Yeah? And actually, I think that's a really unhelpful shadow side of the hero archetype. So that's something we need to look at. If we want to use that as as a myth we want to work with, we need to look at that. So I'm just going to have a quote from the Dhammapada. So the Buddha said in the Dhammapada, for people who don't know the Dhammapada, it's like a collection of verses that the Buddha is said to have just said. It's, they're his words. So, though one were to defeat thousands upon thousands of men in battle, if another were to overcome just one, himself or herself, he or she is a supreme victor. So that's saying that even if, you defeat loads and loads of people in battle, you're not as good as the person who's managed to overcome themselves. So victory over oneself is better than that over others. When a person's conquered themselves and always acts with self-control, neither devas, spirits, Mara or Brahma can reverse the victory of a person like that. So victory over yourself is better than that over others. If a person's conquered themselves, always acts with self-control, all these things which are devas, spirits, Maras or Brahma, and you can think of them as different kind of magical figures that will try and get into your psyche and upset you, but nothing can be reversed. So the Buddha's definitely saying that what we need to be doing is applying this idea of the hero to ourselves, not saying get out there on a horse, go around and shoot loads of people. It's saying, this ourselves that we are working on. And I've always felt like, my family is quite into mountaineering, and my dad climbed in the Himalayas and all that kind of stuff, and then for a long time I was part of a group of people who were really into it as well. And mountaineering definitely has that kind of hero archetype, people who go up, you climb this huge grey mountain, and you climb up all this stuff. And I can remember thinking, actually, this is all very good, but actually the really heroic people that I know are people who are doing things like looking after someone who's got dementia, regularly, day after day, going and looking after that person. Maybe someone who's getting up really early to do a cleaning job because they need to support their family. Somebody who's disabled and is struggling up the hill, but every day they do that to go and get their shopping. I think there's something in that kind of everyday heroism that really speaks to me. I think that's the kind of heroism that I'm talking about. And I think there's an idea in Buddhism called the Bodhisattva ideal. And this is the most sublime idea of the hero we can have. So the Bodhisattva ideal is the idea of a being who wants to attain enlightenment for the whole of all sentient beings. So that's kind of a heroic task, that you want to become enlightened for the sake of all sentient beings, not just the ones you know or you like, not just the ones who are even on this planet, not just the ones who are people, but for all sentient beings. And yes, I think that's very heroic. So that can feel a bit overwhelming sometimes, but I think for me, in my everyday life, the heroic idea of the Bodhisattva ideal is something about becoming as kind as I can, as open as I can, as generous as I can, as wise as I can. And I'm doing that because I recognise that actually I'm not disconnected from other beings. We're all in it together. And I'm not any different from anybody else, that I'm interconnected with them. So basically, the more that I work towards becoming enlightened, so becoming kinder and wiser, as I do that, the world around me will also become kinder and wiser, because it will be reacting to me. The more I create a world in which it's possible for people to be kind and wise, the more I will become kinder and wiser as well. So for me, that means that we're trying to create a world in which people can become kinder and wise. I suppose is why I'm so committed to the Buddhist Centre, because this is a place where people can do what they can to really develop their openness, their kindness, become aware. And recently people have been talking about looking into the future, and I really love that idea. It's like, what would it be like? What can we do now so that people in 100 years' time will come across the Dharma and will have that opportunity that we have? And there's something about thinking way beyond my lifetime that just really opens it up for me. Somehow takes it away from me. It's quite an interesting idea. Okay, so in Buddhism, there's this ultimate hero, the Bodhisattva. And I'll just finish off with explaining where the bliss-bestowing hands come from. So there's a Zen story, great Zen story, which is called the Ox Herding Pictures. So some of you might have seen these. These are 8 images. And what they really do is they tell the story of training the mind. So they show 10 different pictures of a monk, and he's trying to train a very stubborn ox, okay, which represents the mind and the heart. And in the first few pictures, the poor old monk can't even see this ox, like he sees its tail and it sees its rump. He kind of sees it in passing. After a while, he manages to tame it a little bit, and then he manages to ride it. After a while, he becomes at one with the ox in a very kind of Zen style. And in that picture, there's just a circle. So there's no monk, there's no thing, there's just this circle with a little bit open in it, so it's very Zen. But the bit that I think relates to the idea of the heroic journey and returning, we're getting to this idea of returning from the heroic journey, is that in the 10th picture, the monk returns. And that one of the verses says, "Entering the city with bliss-bestowing hands, bare-chested and bare-breasted, he comes into the marketplace. Daubed in mud and ashes, how broad is his smile. There is no need for miracles, for he touches the dead trees and they are in full bloom." So entering the city with bliss-bestowing hands, bare-chested and bare-breasted, he comes into the marketplace. Daubed in mud and ashes, how broad is his smile. There's no need for miracles, for he touches the dead trees and they are in full bloom. And in the picture, this monk is often really fat. He's really fat. And I think that kind of fatness is meant to represent that he's full of wealth. He's full of spiritual wealth. So he comes. So he's had all this time away, but what does he do for the return of his hero's journey? What does he do at the end? He goes into the marketplace where the people are. And he enters into the marketplace kind of completely unconventionally, because he's bare-chested, he's barefooted, and he's daubed in mud and ashes, so in no way is he a conventional figure, but his smile is broad, and he touches the dead trees and they bloom. So his bliss-bestowing hands give people what they need in the marketplace. So it shows that the return, the end of the hero's journey, is to go back into the world and to change the world. And it's like he doesn't even have to try anymore. He's not trying to help anybody. He just does help people just by his presence, just by what he's attained by taming his mind. And I see him as being a spontaneous figure. His generosity, his help for people just flow out of his spiritual practice. So, just to sum up, you can see that the hero's quest really involves that we hear the call to adventure. First of all, we have to hear it and respond to it. We separate ourselves from our normal lives in some way. We have to pass through various initiation. And I was talking about that initiation in terms of the spiritual life, being that part of our practice where we just sit with discomfort, we face up to who we really are. We learn no longer to be driven, perhaps, by some of those unconscious drives that have been pushing us around. And then we become a different person, and we return to the marketplace with bliss-bestowing hands.